Welcome to CSGuitars, the science of loud. Do you remember the Guitartan? A very Scottish guitar built for the Great Guitar Build-Off competition. Well, of course you remember it. The original video was only a couple of weeks ago and your attention spans aren't so short that you've forgotten it already, surely. Well, I want to make another video about it today because, one, due to extensions on the deadline, because of people not being able to get their builds finished on time, the guitar auction will now be between the 18th and 30th of June over at the Great Guitar Build-Off site. So if you want to get your hands on this guitar, go to the link in the description, go across there and start bidding. Two, it turns out you can vote for me in this competition and I'd very much appreciate it if you did. Please head over to the Great Guitar Build-Off site, click on my face and geese your votes. 3, we have so far collectively raised £690 for Simon Community Scotland and I couldn't be more pleased about it, but we can push that number higher, I know we can, so if you want to donate, please go across there and let's get more money for them. And 4, there's a lot of things about the build that I didn't tell you in the initial video that I think you're going to find quite interesting. So if you want to know all of the things that went right, and went wrong about this build, then grab yourself a snack and settle in for another entertaining video from your boy at CSGuitars. The first obstacle was the main Sapele block supplied with the Crimson kit was not long enough for the full flying V shape. Fortunately, there was sufficient material at the top of the blank that could be cut and repositioned to give a large enough area for the body shape. Real woodworkers will no doubt have an issue with the end grain glue join here, but there are a few things to consider that make this a complete non-issue for this application. 1, these aren't structural parts of the instrument. They don't need to bear load, so even this weaker grain arrangement will be sufficient. I can hold the body by these glued joins and swing it around without fear of separation. 2, this will have a 5mm thick oak top glued onto it with long perpendicular slats giving added strength to the join. And 3, I glued one of these on poorly and needed to remove it, and boy did I have a time getting it back off again. I had to cut along the glue line, but as the glue forms a bond stronger than the wood itself, the saw wanted to take the path of least resistance into the fresh wood. These ends aren't going anywhere and are nothing to worry about. Cutting the barrel was more difficult than expected. I thought the jigsaw would make quick work of thinning down the slats, but I was wrong. The slats were too thick for the jigsaw to comfortably cope with, and I could only get a centimetre or 2 at a time before the jigsaw simply refused to move any further. Jigsaws really only cut thinner material well, and if the material is thicker than the blade is deep, then it's not going to work. I had to quickly buy a handsaw and cut all of the slats by hand, which was still a task. Despite an incredibly sharp saw blade, the material put up a lot of resistance. Planing the barrel strips was more problematic than it needed to be due to the workbench moving with each stroke. All the energy of the plane was lost and the bench shifting, causing the blade to stick into the material rather than skimming across it. With a more stable bench, I could have achieved better results more quickly. All of this took far longer than it needed to and was physically exhausting. I'm built for sitting down and thinking about things, not physical exertion. Gluing the barrel strips to the body went without incident, and finding the cavities beneath this new top would be easy with a template that I'd mapped out beforehand. Oh, I forgot to make the template, didn't I? Well, now I don't know where the cavities are. Tapping the wood and listening for the hollow section below was an effective method of locating the cavities, drilling into them with a small drill bit to confirm I was indeed in the right place, and then opening them all wide with a flush bearing router bit. The same router bit method was used to true up all the external body shape. I went back to the hand plane to thin down the top now on the guitar to get everything the same level. This was complicated by each of the slats having the grain facing in a different direction, something I failed to consider when arranging them. The plane would finish one slat smoothly while digging into another, taking ugly chunks out of it. A lot of sanding had to be done with coarse grit sandpaper to remove the tool marks and get anywhere near smooth. The pickguard needed recessed so it would sit at the correct height. This was achieved with a combination of careful chisel work, bulking out a lot of material with the router, and using the Dremel on a mini router base for some of the more hard to reach places. By far my favourite fabrication part of this build was all the metalwork to create the pickguard and control plates. Working from a template sketched out on a clear plastic sheet, the shapes were then transferred to the plastic and aluminium sheet material. It became clear very quickly that I got better results if I first scored the lines I wanted to cut with a razor blade. This allowed the thin jeweler saw to follow the groove, giving a straighter cut and making the cleanup with files a lot easier. I was using cutting lubricant to aid the saw, however I noticed it would smoke when trying to cut the plastic. Friction does indeed make things hot. The metal parts were sanded with increasingly finer grits, being careful to always sand in the same direction to achieve a brushed look. The final pass with steel wool left the material looking semi-polished. There were a few unexpected events with the hardware. You might notice that there seems to be too many holes for the bridge mounting, and that's because I wasn't happy with my original bridge placements and had to pull them all back slightly. Fortunately, with the saddles installed, the error holes are not visible and they could all be plugged with matchsticks anyway. How does that classic saying go again? Measure once, cut twice? Yeah, I think that's probably it. The tuning machines were unexpectedly staggered posts, meaning 3 of them are shorter than the others. The headstock was on the thick side for such low posts, but by the time I realised this was going to be an issue, there was no time to rework the headstock. The lower posts are on the treble side where the thin strings will fit through. I originally had them the other way around, but the thick strings didn't have enough clearance to get through the very low holes. This also ruled out adding any oak barrel as a veneer to the headstock because it was already too thick without adding additional material. See this kilt pin? I bet you'd never guess I accidentally broke this in half and had to reforge the sword, would you? I never got any of it on film either, so you just have to believe me that I grew a few more grey hairs with the stress of it all. This originally had a pin attached to the rear, which I needed to remove and instead add posts that could be pressed into the wood. This pin had been adhered to the pewter with heat, the liquefied metal solidifying to hold the pin in place. Therefore, heat seemed like the ideal method of removal. Unfortunately, I didn't take into consideration the melting point of pewter and had the soldering iron far too hot, melting right through the middle of the blade in an attempt to remove the pin clip. I did panic at that point. Without time to order a new one, I had to repair it. I was able to clean up the joints, hold the 2 halves together with tape, apply flux to the seam and then apply fresh solder, taking care not to apply heat to the pewter for any extended time. The flux allowed the solder to flow freely into the gap, sealing it completely. Some careful reshaping of the material with files and sandpaper later, and you'd never know it had happened. The only part of this that went flawlessly was the electronics. Guitar wiring is incredibly simple and I can autopilot my way through it at this point. 3 500k audio taper potentiometers, a 3-way toggle switch and a mono jack, all wired together with pushback cloth wiring. It's not rocket surgery. I ensured the cavity was shielded with copper foil. But Colin, why didn't you use conductive paint? Because conductive paint is messy, ugly, and for lazy people. Or massive companies wanted to save time and money in the production process to hit a price point. Copper foil is by far the superior option, and there's no reason not to do it in a hand-built project like this. The bridge was grounded with a wire soldered to a copper strip that spanned the bottom of all the saddles. The pickups were an effortless wind this time. 43 gauge wire, blade construction, powerful magnets, hit the designs perfectly and ended up producing the sound and performance I wanted for the instrument. For everyone who was worried about it, the tartan is made of wool, it's a thin material, it's entirely magnetically transparent, it's not impacting the pickup response in any way whatsoever. This will probably be the last you see of this guitar, as once the auction is over, it'll be winging its way to its new forever home, giving me just enough time to do a last little bit of setup on this to make sure it's perfect for its new owner. If you want that new owner to be you, then make sure you bid in the auction. 18th to the 30th of June at the Great Guitar Build Off site. Grab yourself this, it's one of a kind, you don't want to miss out. Links will be in the description. You can also support my chosen charity, Simon Community Scotland. Links down there as well. Let's raise as much money for them as possible. If you want to find out what Simon Community do, you can check out either my initial video or you can visit their website. And finally, make sure you go and vote for CSGuitars and the Guitartan at the Great Guitar Build Off site. Let's win this one. Come on, guys, let's get behind me. Let's do it. Don't forget to click all the buttons you're supposed to make this video viable to the ever-changing whims of the YouTube algorithm. That's all for now. Keep it loud and stay safe. Right, let's get our pizza out of the oven.